While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or already in retirement, you've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, joined by the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Bruinsma. Please check us out online, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. Social media is just Retirement Reformation, all one word. Of course, you can also download our app, Retirement Reformation, in the Apple Podcast Store. You know, as a world, we feel and we deal with anxiety, and we deal with fear, and we deal with loneliness. And of course, during COVID, those things were dealt with in exponential levels. Bruce Bruinsma joins us today to talk about how those things are affecting seniors who are in retirement or approaching retirement. Bruce Bruinsma, welcome back to iRetire4Him.
Thanks, Jim. It's good to be here, and I'm really pleased that we're addressing this subject. We're talking in our overall series about culture and its impact on seniors and everything that we do as Christ followers. And this whole issue of loneliness, anxiety, and fear, it just seems like it's exploding around us everywhere. When we realize that for the first time since perhaps Methuselah, we have 5 generations alive at the same time. And so now we have the interactions between those. And so it's not just those of us that are approaching retirement, approaching that time of implementing our future funded ministry, but the stages that you go through between, say, 60 and 65 and 104. But we no longer are islands. We are impacted by those around us. We impact those around us. And again, going back to that idea of 5 generations, that impact has exponential influence on us and us on them. Now, regardless of when you're listening to this podcast, you will remember when the French Open in this year, that there was the leading women's tennis player in the world, Naomi Osaka, and was Japanese, and she was prepared there was no doubt she was going to win that tournament and perhaps Wimbledon thereafter. And in after the first week of that tournament, she withdrew. She said, I'm feeling so concerned, so anxious, so that I can't perform, and I have to go out. Well, the media just went nuts. Why is this, and what happened, and how could she, and she's disappointing her fans, and she has a responsibility. But as that conversation deepened and a little more conversation came out, it became clear that it was an issue of mental health that was not being addressed, or at least not being addressed publicly. Matter of fact, when I think growing up, when someone had a mental health problem, we said they were crazy.
Yeah.
We said they were not connected. It was viewed within the Christian community probably like a sin, and that there was really something wrong with them, and they didn't have enough faith, and just all those conversations that just got all mixed up. Well, that conversation, starting with her, has kind of progressed. And then in the middle of the Olympics, the greatest Olympic star, the person who represented the Olympics for the world, gymnast Simone Biles, said, I can't handle it. I've got to take some time aside. And then as the media dug into that and showed a little bit about what that meant, more and more of that conversation has come out. And it plays its role for everyone. So, for example, in Simone Biles, they apparently have a term for that amongst gymnasts. It's called having the twisties. And it's when they're in the air and twisting and they lose their perspective about where they are. So a loss of perspective. The inability to perform physical activities that they've practiced 1,000 times and that they could do absolutely in their sleep, all of a sudden it disappears and they can't do it. They forget about what it is that they are even supposed to do next. And so here are these finely trained athletes, and they're in that situation. Matter of fact, I was reading an article, and they reminded me of a couple of other situations. About a year ago, there was a basketball player, Kyrie Irving, and he took some time off, and they didn't really talk about it as in that same way, but that's exactly what it was. And then I got thinking back in my own family, Jim. Our daughter, Bethany, was an outstanding swimmer. I mean, she was something. We put her in the water at age 4, and she was off. I mean, it's just one of those amazing things. When she was 12 years old, she was had the second fastest time in the 50 and the 100 free in that whole age group, and was just poised to be able to make that move for the Olympics and those kinds of things. She hurt her shoulder, and then she came to me and she said, "Dad, I really think I want to go to Westmont College." I said, "Well, that's a fine school, Beth, but they don't have a swim team." She said, "I know."
She was just done.
And so she was done. And I wish I had recognized then some of the things that I'm seeing now, because perhaps there were some areas that she needed help that I had no idea about. And so this whole idea of anxiety and what does it mean? I was doing a little research and in an article that I was reading that came out last year in a cultural aspects dealing with the cultural aspects of anxiety, and it said anxiety disorders are some of the most prevalent mental disorders. These disorders are strongly influenced by ethnic, racial, and cultural factors and are everywhere.
When we come back, I really want to dig deep into this and how it's affecting those who are in the retired years. And because I know we're hearing this, I live in Florida. I live where retirees go. And this is something that's very, very common. And how at the Retirement Reformation we can help people deal with this, and how as Jesus followers we can deal with this. You're listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. We're going to be right back with a special guest in our second segment. When we come back in our third segment, Bruce and I will pick up this conversation on anxiety in the retirement years. You're listening to iRetire4Him. We'll be right back.
The Retirement Reformation wants to come alongside you as you navigate in each stage of your retirement. Our online resources include our blog, our downloadable books, and life planning studies, as well as membership and coaching options. Go to retirementreformation.org and use these resources to begin the transformation of your retirement. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, "I retire for Him." That's retirementreformation.org. Now, back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, I'm joined by Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. We got a very special guest for you today during our second segment of the show. As we always bring in somebody that's got a retirement story to tell. Today, you get to hear from my mom, Marie Brangenberg, who hails from Marana, Arizona. Much to my chagrin, I wish she lived in Florida with me. Marie Brangenberg, welcome to iRetire4Him.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always great to see you. And I am not retired. Even though I am in my 80s, I still am being used by the Lord. I have been teaching for about 20 years or more. And but And I thought once I lost that job, when we moved, that and teaching jobs were very scarce, that I would be retired. But
So-
God had other ideas.
Well, and he did have other ideas. Mom, you moved to Chicago with Dad when he got a transfer, and you did something that most people would say perhaps needed you to get some mental counseling. You went back to school. What did God lead you to do?
Well, this was after all three of our children were through college and married, and the grandchildren were beginning to come. I was listening to the Christian radio, and I said, we really need more Christian counselors. And I knew that to be so true from experiences of troubled kids and families when I was teaching. And so I prayed and prayed about it. And before you know it, they said, this is a new concept. It's online learning. And I thought, I can do that. And God said, you sure can. And so I enrolled, and God kept me busy for the next 3 years. This was a great time of inspiration and fulfillment, and very busy. It was very demanding. I wrote many papers. I took many exams. I took a comprehensive exam on all the courses that I took. And I had to then think about getting in 2000.
So when you were all done, what did you have in your hands?
I was all done, but I wasn't finished. I had to have an internship for 2,000 hours. And so when we moved again, God miraculously opened up mentorship for me, an internship in Minnesota and in an evangelical association. And I had wonderful training and wonderful experience, met all kinds of people, police patrolees, kids that needed play therapy, families that weren't speaking to one another. I learned how to do conflict resolution. But most of all, God showed me out of 200 different ways I had approaches to therapy. The best one, the fifth scripture was cognitive behavioral. And it just means that if you can change from negative thoughts, replace them with God's thoughts, He is in the business of changing people, and it works.
So,
Marie, just a couple of questions to put a context. So how old were you when you started that online learning?
and that was a master's degree. That's what I was trying to get you to say. You got a master's degree in Christian counseling.
So when was that?
I was nearly 60 years old, and by the time I actually finished the internship, I was 60 years old, and they asked me to stay on, and I did, and it was a wonderful place to help people and serve the Lord and grow myself as well.
Well, that positive attitude that you're reflecting is really critical, we know, and that's why when we call it the retirement reformation, it's change thinking, it's cognitive change.
Amen.
That we're talking about for those that are 60 plus. So what kind of counseling would you give to someone who is perhaps in their 60s or 70s and just really hasn't made that cognitive change yet to know what it is that God has in mind for them? What kind of counseling would you do for them?
I would tell them to be open to God. I would pray with them. I would tell them that God is full of surprises, how He surprised me and how I was being used and how fulfilling and meaningful it is. And so all the time I was studying, we were also very involved in churches. Every time we moved, we found a good church. And I would tell them, pray about it, be open. Don't just plan finances or travel or some kind of recreation. Plan to go with God for your retirement years, because that's what they're for. That God is allowing every day that I know, is for Him. And He does not leave you alone. He will be with you and help you. And so I would tell them, oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, I have a I have a presentation that I'm making on Tuesday to about 100 pastors. And with your permission, I'm going to use that quote to open it is plan to keep going with God because he surprises you and he's got something special for you. What a great message.
And it is a wonderful life. It's not just, there is time to travel, and there's time to visit and all of the other things that go on. But while I was studying and while I also was doing a lot of counseling, we also attended Bible classes. I taught Bible classes. We prayed a lot. I went to Sunday school. I helped with Bible school. And so it wasn't just counseling. God has a place for you. And I'm just encouraging you. It is an opportunity. It is a privilege.
So, Mom, you and Dad moved to Arizona to a golf community 20 years ago. And actually, you moved to Arizona 20 plus years ago, but you moved into a golf community 20 years ago. Not a lot, but you were still actively counseling within your church and ministering to those people in your neighborhood. How many people come up to you and said, "Hey, Marie, when are you going to retire? You're still working every day." Did people give you a hard time about continuing on with purpose in your retired years?
Well, some did, but most of the people we know are Christian friends, and they encouraged me. And so when we moved to Tucson, again, before we bought a house, we looked for a church, and this church, big church in the middle of Tucson, gave me an office, and I was doing counseling as much as I could fit in. I did all this counseling pro bono because people that mostly need counseling cannot afford it or don't have insurance, and therefore it is a great way to serve both God and them. And God had been good to us, and we were able to be generous in those ways. And he really stretched me, and it was a wonderful experience.
You know, it's interesting that you just gave a short lesson on stewardship, not just on purpose and meaning and listening to God's word, but on a message of stewardship. So we'd hope our listeners are plugged into that also. That's beautiful.
Okay.
So one last question for you, Mom. I know that if I let you, you could just go on for an hour because, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So you've yes, Bruce, I knew you'd like that. Mom, you slowed down and you stopped driving a few years back. And so you stopped going to the church to do counseling, yet you still do counseling on the phone occasionally. But one of the things that's been cool is that you've taken this extra time and until just recently teaching in Sunday school where you'd study for hours and hours and hours in order to be able to teach a biblical lesson. Do you still find purpose in your days at 87 years old every day?
Amen. I do. I have counseled people in the neighborhood. I still do occasional counseling by phone. I am still on the teaching team for my Sunday school class. And I have not just told you that we are in the church that we originally joined here in Tucson after 20 years. And I spent about a dozen of those years counseling women in the Heartbeat Ministry for parenting and marriage. And then all at the same time for over 10 years in the prayer room after the sermons to answer people's needs, to lead them to the Lord. What a privilege that is. And people came back and they thanked. Some of them you never know whether about the outcome, but I will someday in heaven.
That's right.
You will indeed.
Bruce, any final questions for our esteemed guest, my mother?
No, other than the fact we got to have her back because there are about 3 or 4 themes that she was expounding on that. I'll bet she's got some more for us. So
why don't
we will do this again.
The topic for today, we're talking about a little bit of in our main segments, we're talking about a little anxiety. Why don't you ask Mom one of the questions having to do with that since she's got that counselor hat on and she does have that degree?
Well, let me ask you, it's a question that we all struggle with, but as Christians, what role does anxiety play and how as Christians should we think about that. We see that happening in many of senior adults, but it also happens in high school and all the different age groups. So how do we deal with anxiety in just a short message?
Anxiety is fear, and God is not the author of fear. And so we look not only to changing thoughts and situations, but we also look to some medication for that. As a counselor, I did not give medication, but the people were directed to get it from time to time. But God is a God of peace, and that is the opposite of fear. And He's a God of love. And so we have nothing to fear. We need to trust God completely. And I'm doing that and have been doing it for many, many years. And I can testify that He has a plan for your life, and not to hurt you, but to help you and to make you progress in the kingdom.
Should give her a radio show. Mom, just one, and a follow-up on that. Okay, how do you deal when you suffer from anxiety or get fearful? How do you deal with it? How do you put your counselor hat on you to deal with what's going on in your own life?
I pray. I get out scripture. I have wonderful books that tell me exactly.
Really? We don't see any books in your background. We had no idea you had books.
Some people like to buy a lot of clothes. I buy a lot of good books, and I keep them. And by the way, thank you for your 3 books. I read all 3 of them. They are wonderful, and I am so proud of you and Martha. And I might just say that we have 3 kids. Jim is the MC of these broadcasts, and they were serving him so well. We have another son who was a seminary graduate and teacher, and who now ministers to many people through research to a Hawaiian church that he was associated with. And we have this one daughter who is an CPA who has taught accounting in Christian colleges and been on the faculty as a chief financial officer. And so not only do you experience spirit growth, all of our family has, and I'm so thankful for that. We have wonderful things going. So when I'm gone, they'll still be going, and they will retire for Him.
Wow. You've been listening to iRetire4Him. We'll be right back with more from Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg. Thank you to Marie Brangenberg.
Thank you for having me.
It's time we stop looking at our retirement years as 30 years of vacation, leisure, and self-gratification. Let's take control of our retirement life plan and build meaning, purpose, and intentionality into it. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the word manifesto. We invite you to make a retirement declaration to yourself and to God. Sign the manifesto and start changing the way you think about retirement. retirementreformation.org. Click on Manifesto. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for Him. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, that was a fun conversation with my mom. I'm glad you got to meet her. And I'm glad that she got to share a little bit about what she does and how she handles her anxiety. As we talk today about anxiety, Bruce, why was it that you wanted to talk about anxiety on iRetire4Him?
Well, one of the things we know that there's about, say 40 million, 35, 40, 45 million of us Christ followers who fit into this category. And because it is so large, all the different things that happen younger show up again in older. And this anxiety is a piece to it. And I've witnessed it personally in our prior part of this segment. We talked about Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka and how it affects athletes in that area. Now we can talk about how does it affect anxiety disorders in older adults.
Let's call them chronologically superior.
I like it, chronologically superior. So generalized anxiety disorder is the most common anxiety disorder among older adults. representing over 50% of anxiety disorders in older adults, and a specific phobia, and as a specific phobia, ranked second. Many anxiety disorders among older adults are often associated with traumatic events such as a fall or acute illness. Older adults face the loss of friends and family members, decreased mobility, greater isolation, and other increasingly stressful situations. Let me just step away from that for a minute and just put it in this term, is that our culture says that retirement is a time where there is a lack of stress, all leisure, no problems, an easy time. Let me tell you, that's not true.
Is it true for anybody that's in retirement?
No, it's not. Retirement is, in fact, probably the most complex 30 years of your life. And we can talk about all the different complexities that come. But let me just bring in the cultural elements that start to impact all of this together. Just think of it. All the activities going on with the women's movement. And now, what is the role? Your mom as an example. My mom when she was alive. Judy and our wives thinking about their roles as they go further, and the cultural issues of the women's movement. Minority issues. It talked about in that piece that I read further that cultural roles and ethnic roles play a role in all of this. The fact that there are so many options. Your mom talked about that in terms of the options that are available to her and those that she talks about. In our interview with Will, he talked about all of the options that as he moves into those older ages that are available. Opportunities, issues of social justice, things that maybe either confuse us or make us angry or we don't understand or we respond to, and then all the political issues that go on. There's all these cultural issues that are on us, and being a senior, you do not escape those, but you are actually engaged with them often in a different way.
Well, okay, so you got cultural issues that are causing anxiety. You also have financial issues that cause anxiety. I've never met a single chronologically superior adult that were in the retirement years that weren't worried, will all their money last till they last? And so they're worried about money. They're worried about health care because they want to make sure that they got the right health insurance policy, because some people get sick early. Some people don't get sick till late. They're worried about, are they near their kids? Are they not near their kids? Are they near their grandkids or their great-grandkids? And so there's so many things. And some of them are worried about their golf game until they realize that it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's so many things feeding into anxiety. So how do we, as a Jesus follower who's retired, looking at retirement through a Reformation kind of a mindset, how do we deal with anxiety?
Well, we talk about in Romans 12:5 that it's in the renewing of your mind, and your mom talked about that beautifully. But that is where your head is where you will be also.
Right.
Simone Biles said that in her world, and in a senior world is exactly the same. Where your head is, there will you be also. So is your head in the Bible? Is your head in prayer? Is your head in community? One of the things that we know, and we'll talk about that perhaps some more in the next segment when we talk about loneliness, is the fear of not having community, the fear of being rejected, and all of those things. And we'll talk about those some more. But here, this whole anxiety, it's just not knowing, and in many ways feeling inept to be able to deal with it.
Okay, so let's get some solutions. We got to give some solutions before we run out of time. We only got a couple minutes left. So what are some solutions for our friends who are chronologically superior, your peers, my peers, and everybody in between us? Where can they go for help?
Well, let's start with the Bible. Let's go to our Christian community that is healthy and interact with them. And then I think what's really important is that we turn our thinking from it being focused inwardly with all of these issues to outwardly, and how can we make a difference? And when we go, aha, God is calling me to make a difference, that changes our thinking, changes our focus, changes our priorities, and gives us the mechanism to be able to take a step peacefully and in God's time rather than ours and anxiety.
Well, and it's also important to note that counseling is sometimes necessary. Sometimes you just need a counselor to talk things through, but being in a small group is powerful. I know that for my mom and dad and Martha's mom and dad, their small groups have been a huge source of encouragement for them during their retired years, and they're in their late 80s now. And when things have been stressful, they have a group to share it with, people to walk alongside them, and that's powerful. And Bruce, your small group's been important for you as well.
Absolutely. In the last year and a half, as we've done our small group online, we've actually become closer together. We've had a greater sense of community than we even do when we've been in person. Now we're coming back to the in-person piece, and the fact that we have built trust, we've built relationship, we've built an understanding of each other's issues, and how, in fact, that we can support each other. Those are all key pieces to taking anxiety and pushing it aside, right, so we can clearly see what Jesus has for each of us.
And for those of you listening that aren't sure that the Bible really speaks to anxiety, read the book of Jeremiah, read the book of Isaiah. Both those prophets were chased by kings, threatened with death for just speaking the truth. And there's so many examples of that, but God sees your anxiety and wants to bring healing to that, and can bring healing to that. And so we recommend that you get in touch with us at the Retirement Reformation on our website, retirementreformation.org. You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. We're Christ followers journeying from retirement to reformation, so we can ultimately say, I retire
for him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Bruinsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money, and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.